Hey everybody, thanks for watching again. We are in week 2 of our series called Now What, and it is the last part of this series towards the end of our Easter season. We looked at the Easter story last Sunday and saying, well, man, that must have been a pretty big now what moment in the lives of the disciples. And this week we're going to kind of tie a bow around that and wrap up that idea of what do we do in now what moments where we feel like we don't know the next step. What if love requires something bigger than I am? That's a scary thought sometimes when we think about, well, when Jesus died on the cross, he left us with the challenge of answer the question, what does love require of you in every situation? And our now what moment comes when we go, well, what if love requires something that's bigger than me that I can't do by myself? That's a now what moment. And so this week we're going to really dive into that and dive into the question of when we feel like we're far away from God and when we feel like we can't ever measure up and get back close to God, that God is closer than we think. But before we dive into that stuff, before we dive into the topic this week, curriculum-wise, I want to share with you our tip and trick of the week. It's from the Art of Asking Questions. We've got one more after this one, and then we'll do a big recap of them all. But hopefully this helps you in your conversations with students that we're not teaching small groups, but we are leading a discussion. And in order to lead a discussion, we have to ask good questions. So this week, the tip is learn to question your students' answers. Don't allow a student just to state an answer without him or her defending it. Challenge the answers your students give by applying them to all kinds of situations, good situations, difficult situations. Test your students for consistency in their answer. Don't just accept fluff or the typical Sunday school answers. When a student can back up their answers, some pretty cool things happen. When students can know the why and explain their answers beyond just the simple, it makes it personal and it sinks in and becomes more of a go-to answer or a go-to reaction when students are faced with that situation in their lives. So it makes it a little bit more just of a natural reaction to situations in their lives. So learn to question your students' answers. Challenge them to answer the why they believe that. Now this week, like I said, we're in week 2 of Now What? And it's talking about the bottom line of he's near even when you're far. And so I don't know about you, but a lot of us maybe have felt like we're going backwards and not forwards in different things. We've thought about quitting, and maybe that was baseball, or it was your grades, or it was a relationship. But there's been moments in all of our lives where we feel like we're going backwards instead of forwards. We probably all experience this differently in specific areas of our lives, but I bet there's one area where most of us have had this feeling before, and that's right here in church. An area where we probably feel like we're moving backwards more than anything else is when it comes to our relationship or sometimes lack of relationship with God. We come to church and we want to get closer to God, so we start reading our Bibles more, we start praying more, we go to church more, but then things get busy and we just don't. Or we make the mistake that leaves us feeling, or we make a mistake that leaves us feeling like we're farther from God than ever before, so we try and fail again. Now before long, we begin to think the same things I thought in my now what moment, are the same things that I thought in the moment where I felt like I was moving backwards instead of forward. We think, I've tried to get better at this, and it's just not working. Maybe it's not for me. And if we're really honest, we think maybe it's not for anybody. Maybe it's not even real at all. Of course, we don't say that out loud. We just slowly start moving in the other direction. We stop praying. We stop showing up. We get busy with other things. And I wonder, if we look at a graphic between near and far and asked you to think about where you are, what would you say? I bet a lot of us would point somewhere near the far. And we would be farther away than near in our relationship with God at a lot of times. So what do we do about that? How can we change that graphic to go, no, I want to be more near. I want to be more near than I am far in this visual of near and far. And it's not like we want to be there necessarily, but what else are we supposed to do when we've tried and just feel like this whole God thing isn't working out? Are there even other options, and what are we supposed to do if we've already checked out and walked away? Some of our students are there. They go, man, I feel like I don't want to be far, but what else am I supposed to do? I've tried praying more. I've tried reading scripture more. What else am I supposed to do? Now, we're not talking about guys in our scripture today who just thought about moving out or moving on. The scripture we're looking at this week is about 2 guys who were already on the road out of town. They are already leaving. And just to give you some background, these 2 men anticipated Jesus to be the next king of Israel. We talked about that last week. But in fact, Many of people left their jobs and homes to follow Jesus. So you can imagine their surprise when Jesus was put to death on the cross. All this left the followers wondering, now what? Last week we said that Mary just sat outside the tomb waiting. Like many of Jesus' followers, she didn't know what to do. This is where the passage begins, on the very same day. Now that same day, two of them were going to the village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were walking with each other and talking about with each other everything that had happened. And that's from Luke chapter 24, verse 13 through 14. That's the starting verse that we're going to start with this week. But what really matters in this story is the direction they're heading. Luke says they're headed to Emmaus from Jerusalem. These two are literally walking away from it all. Their king had just died, and you can't follow a king who's dead, so now what? Maybe they're ready to call it quits, or maybe they just wanted a break. We don't know their exact intention, but the point is they had made a decision to leave. Now, some of our students are on that road right now. They've had an encounter with Jesus. Maybe it was summer camp, maybe it was a retreat, or maybe it was in your small group. And it felt real at the time, but then things changed. It doesn't feel the same. The changes you saw in yourself started to fade. So you're just starting walking back to where you were and where you used to be before Jesus was even part of the picture. So what do we do with that? If that's you, if that's your students, then what happens next in the story is very important, because there's something our students need to know about Jesus that might be a game changer for them. What happened next was totally unexpected. And we pick it up in verse 15. As they walked and discussed these things with the others, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Now suddenly, Jesus himself, the risen God, comes up and walks along with them. I have no idea why they didn't recognize him. Maybe he looked different, or maybe they weren't expecting to see him, but it didn't register. Now, at one point, Jesus even tells them about how the prophets from years earlier had told them this would happen, and began to teach them of all that was part of God's plan. Now finally it got late, and they all walked together a really long way. So all three of them stopped at the night and had supper around the table. Jesus picked up bread and began to pass it around, and right at that moment they recognized. Then their eyes were open, it says in verse 31 through 32. Their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They finally recognized the guy who had traveled all that way with them as Jesus. And then he vanishes. Could you imagine what they're thinking? Like, oh my gosh, dude, that was Jesus. But what was he doing here with us? Shouldn't he be appearing to people who are going towards Jerusalem, not walking away from Jerusalem? But he walked with us, and our hearts were burning because of him. I think that's so key. Wasn't he supposed to be walking with people going towards Jerusalem when we were walking away from Jerusalem? It's incredible. And that's what they learned that day. And it's what many of us desperately need to hear, that they thought they were far because they were walking away. And they would have been right if it hadn't been for who showed up in that moment. They might have been walking away from Jesus, but he wasn't walking away from them. He was going after them. And they ran into a truth that's going to be pretty freeing to a lot of us. And that's this: he's near even when you're far. So where are you? We're going to ask our students this Sunday, where are you? Is there an area of your life where you've begun to walk in the other direction? Maybe it isn't in obvious ways, but in small, subtle ways. Have you begun to move in reverse or to back away from him, to check out? If so, we want our students to know this, that they're not alone. Nearly every follower of Jesus will encounter a moment when they find themselves on the road walking away. The thing that we have to decide is, how are we going to answer the question to now what? And here are some of the things to remember in that moment. We have to notice him. Today, I want to challenge you to take notice. Pay attention to the burning in your heart. Where do you sense God at work in your life? In the world around you, even on those days when it feels like he was a million miles away. Even on the days when you wonder, does he really exist? Even on the days when you think he's mad at you. Maybe if we just look up, we'll find that Jesus has been there with us all along. Second thing we can do is turn around. When the men in our story realized that Jesus is with them, it changed everything. Because when Jesus shows up, everything is different. Especially the direction they're walking in. They immediately turned around and began walking back, and you can do the same thing. We can turn around if we've been wandering away. If we're in bad relationships, we can turn around and go back. If our students are partying and doing things they shouldn't be doing, they can turn around. If we're ignoring our relationship with God, you can turn around and go back. That's the beauty of grace that God gives us. Now, the secret in this is not to have to muster up all the courage and willpower to make it all the way back to Jerusalem on your own. The gospel tells us that Jesus actually comes and walks alongside us to reveal himself to us and gives us the invitation to simply turn around. We don't have to muster up all the courage and strength and power to make it all the way back to Jerusalem to encounter Jesus, because Jesus is right there with us right now. So that's where we're landing this week with our sermon series, that Jesus is with us. We don't have to make a huge trek back to him, because Jesus never stops pursuing you. Even when you're near, or even when you're far, Jesus is always near. And that's an answer to a now what moment. So this Sunday is beach night for our students, and we'll be taking our whole confirmation class out and our 11th grade group out to the beach for the whole confirmation ceremony, and for them to claim the name Christian, for them to claim the name and the idea that Jesus is the plan, and that Jesus is the answer to our now what moments. And that changes the way that those moments are answered in our lives. That changes the way that we approach the rest of our lives. So it's going to be a big night this Sunday for us at youth group. Dominic is going to be the one giving our sermon series to intro talk for the small group time, because I'll be out at the beach doing that with our confirmation class. But we'll be back at 7 o'clock to join everybody at worship here on the Annona campus to welcome our confirmation students back in. We'll celebrate them, and we'll tie a nice big bow around this idea of students claiming the name Christian and what it means for our now what moments. When we say I'm Christian, it forces us to approach those now what moments with a different set of eyes. So our people at the 360 United campus, we have that to look forward to. So lift that up in your small groups. Lift that up and lift up the importance of claiming the name Christian and letting that change your lives. And for the Annona campus, it's going to be a big night for us. We get to celebrate. We get to welcome these students back. We get to hear from Dominic some of these same ideas that I'm talking about here in this video, that Jesus is the plan, and we only see a picture of it sometimes. So in our now what moments, we'll get to hear some from Dominic. You'll hear some from me. In our now what moments, how is calling ourselves Christian and believing in Jesus a game changer? That's where we're landing with this topic. So we'll see you at 4:45 here on the Annona campus for our small group leader huddle. Omar's got a time for everybody at the 360 United campus for you guys to meet and pray. That time together is super valuable. So cherish that time where you get to pray together before you go into youth program as leaders. We'll see you at 4:45 here at Annona campus. Whatever time Mr. Omar tells you guys at the 360 United campus, spend that time in prayer, celebrating what Jesus is doing in your lives and celebrating what God's doing in our ministries together. Love you guys. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you Sunday. Bye.